Hey, it's Drybear. Another week has come and went, so it's time to check in on our tank rankings for Dragonflight Season 1. We'll compare all the tank specializations together in all forms of PvE content and compare it to last week to see what has changed over the last week of performance. If you find value in this video, leave a like down below. It helps me out tremendously. Subscribe for more gaming content, and as always, you can find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. You should come by. Maybe once, or you just come by, say hi, say hello, say howdy, say hey there. Let's start like we always do by checking in on last week's numbers. These are pulled from Warcraft logs as pure parses for the tanks at the end of the week of week 10. And we'll compare this to where the tanks are going into week 11. Keep in mind, Blood DK got a damage buff prior to the end of week 11, and they're getting another one. They just got another one yesterday. So they're probably generally damage that has the biggest impact when it comes to Mythic Plus, because that's where it matters the most. But we'll see kind of how that pans out. But for the first time, I think ever, we saw Protection Warrior not in first or second after their nerfs in the last big major update. And we'll see if these trends continue going into week 11. And boom, we're into week 11. Here are the latest numbers. We talked about this last week, and I still agree with that assessment, and that tanks are overall in a good spot. They're relatively smooth. There's no major outliers in either direction. There's a couple pain points that need to be addressed, and hopefully they get addressed as we go into 10.0.7. But in general, I think you can use any tank you want for most content up to a certain point. And that's awesome, and they all perform pretty well, and they've done a good job of targeting some of the pain points. So let's go through where the tanks lined up this week. In the first spot overall is Blood DK. They are tied basically for first in Mythic Raid and Heroic Raid. They are about as good as Brewmaster as far as the scoring goes. And in Mythic Plus, they're the best. And that's why I'm shocked. This is prior to them getting another 3% damage buff. I don't know why they keep buffing Blood DK's damage. They're already super sustainable. They do good damage. It's not as good as Protection Warrior, but who is as good as Protection Warrior? Maybe like Brewmaster in some situations, but in general, I'm not sure why they keep getting damage buffs. Hey man, if you're a Blood DK, stonks. Blood stonks are through the roof. Congrats. Enjoy your dividends. That's where we're at. So Blood DK in the top spot. They do well in all content. I would say in week 11, they're the best tank in the game as far as performance goes, and they're getting even better in week 12. So there you go. Brewmaster tank in the second slot. They needed some love. I wouldn't call it love compared to other tanks like Guardian or some of their specs in the game that were struggling, but they needed a little bit of cleanup for going into 10.0.5, and they got it. I think losing 15 seconds on their Celestial Brew was incredible. They're still super fun. Damage distribution was a great change for them, and they're so much fun, man. I love my Brewmaster. They're one of the specs that the harder the difficulty of content is, the better they do. Like they rise to the challenge so much because then they have more stagger to play with. Their damage is good. Like they're just in a good spot, man. Brewmasters are really good. They're a little bit harder to play than most, but that doesn't seem to affect them much when it comes to Heroic Raid versus Mythic Raid. They're still insanely good. And hey man, you can rely on Brewmasters. And one of my favorite parts about playing my Brewmaster is that if you get a 10 stack Celestial Brew, you can actually use it as an absorb for so many things in Vault of the Incarnates that you can just skip through or eat through mechanics because that absorb is so god dang big. It's fun, man. It's good. So Brewmaster in the second slot, Protection Warrior in the third spot. They're all pretty close together, but because of the nerfs that Protection Warrior got, they're not the kings anymore when it comes to performance. Shockingly, they're still with Blood DK when it comes to high Mythic Plus keys, but Blood DK outperformed them this week, and they're getting buffed. So I don't know. I guess that's where they're at. I mean, Protection Warrior was the king and queen of Season 1. Undisputed, unquestionable. Protection Warrior has been the best tank this season in all categories. They got nerfed and they've been kind of bumped slightly down. Doesn't mean they're not good anymore. They're still amazing. They still have one of the best kits for almost every situation. And they still do some of the best AoE burst damage of any tank in the game, period. If they pop their cooldowns, they have Ravager, and they have everything ready with good rage generation, their damage is actually insane. It's ridiculous how much they can do. So they're still in a great spot, but they're not number one every single week, and I think that's probably good. It's good to see some variety. Vengeance DH is, I think, score-wise up from last week in general. They're still doing, I mean, they're good. That's kind of the best way to put it. They're not standout in Mythic Raid, Heroic Raid, or Mythic Plus, but they're not underperforming either. And they did get some passive changes to tankiness. I still think that they need like maybe a little bit more passive tankiness, like not much, but just a little bit more. I feel like you really have to lean on the essences that come out, the fragments, a little bit more than some of the other tanks. And if you don't have one of your cooldowns rolling at just the right way, I feel like they're, like in a weakened state, I feel like they're weaker than every other tank since I've been playing them all. But, if you do everything right and you keep those windows tight, they do great. They do just fine. I love the change that they made on the demon that comes towards you. Previously, it was hard to one-shot that depending on your gear level, but they made it a lot better by being able to do more with Throw Glaive, which is a great change. Havoc doesn't have to worry about it, but Vengeance previously did, and I think it was good on them for recognizing that and cleaning it up. Underneath Vengeance is Protection Paladin, who has just been on this roller coaster that I don't understand. I don't get it. They got some nice changes. They're getting a bunch of changes coming in 10.0.7. Paladin is easily the most changed class in 10.0.7. They had a huge heyday in Mythic Plus, starting at the beginning of the year in January, which is really nice. And they've held on to it. They're still really good in Mythic Plus. In fact, some weeks they've been in top 2 or even top 1 when it comes to Mythic Plus, unquestioned. I think it depends on the affixes. They have some really awesome tools for avoiding damage, depending on how they spec. And I think that's what allows them to stand out in Mythic Plus. But they've been, for some reason, this week was not their best week for Raid. I'm not really sure why. They are getting some changes that should help with that. A little bit of damage increase. Nice. More damage on Shield of the Righteous is going to be useful for them, especially for threat generation. But maybe, I'm not sure. Maybe they're just harder to play. I don't know. They're even getting outperformed by Guardian Druid in Mythic Raid this week, which hasn't been the case previously. So I guess they do warrant the changes. Protection Paladin getting changes along with Blood DK, but that's where they're at. And lastly, we have Guardian Druid. I would say, and I've had the same sentiment last week. I'm going to echo it again this week because nothing has changed. I still think Guardian Druid is great in Raid. They're harder to play because you have to manage your cooldowns well. You have to make sure you have enough Iron Fur for when the moment is right. You have to heal yourself properly, and you have to be very careful about how you position yourself. But if you do all that well, and you're being careful, and you're using your rage properly, I think Guardian Druid is awesome in Raid. They just struggle in Mythic Plus, and the scores show this as well. They are a large deviation away from every other tank in the game when it comes to Mythic Plus. You can see they're 4 points behind Vengeance Demon Hunter, and that's comprising why they're further behind on this list here. In fact, if they had a better Mythic Plus showing, this line would be even more attractive for tanks. And I think part of it's just their ability to deal with magic damage. Part of it's their ability to deal damage. And part of it's their timing windows when it comes to defensive. So maybe they need a cooldown reduction on 1 or 2 of their really important cooldowns. They got some new builds in 10.0.5. I don't know how those have panned out as far as Mythic Plus specifically. I'd have to dig in to see where those builds ended up as far as going more arcane damage or going for regrowth procs or having more having more with your Maul builds, putting all that together. I'm not sure, but they definitely are noticeably worse than the other tanks in the game when it comes to Mythic Plus. But everywhere else, I would say Protection Paladin and Guardian Druid in Raid, and then Guardian Druid in Mythic Plus, everything else seems good. Like, we're actually in a pretty decent spot still. I'm actually pretty happy with all things considered where tanks are in season 1, week 11. We're in that spot there. We'll see if anything changes in 10.0.7. We'll see where Blood DK and Protection Paladin end up after the buffs we got yesterday for all of these categories. But yeah, I think, that's kind of where we're at. I think overall, compared to healers and compared to DPS especially, tanks are, they're doing all right. They're doing all right. That's the story. That's the news. That's how the cookie crumbles, baby. So that is the video. If you found value in the video, leave a like down below. If you don't, I'll know, and I know where you live, and I will send you muffin baskets, but I will eat the tops of every muffin if you don't like the video. And come by my live stream, twitch.tv/Drybear. I'm live every single day. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.